There we go. So thanks everyone for coming. I'll begin by acknowledging the Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal, Gundagara and Biripi peoples of Australia, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which CSU's campuses are located, and pay respects to their elders, both past and present. It's brilliant to have people actually in a room for one of these. I think this is the first time for 18 months, maybe 2 years almost, I think, since we've had a face-to-face research seminar, so thanks very much. So the usual format is about a 40-minute presentation. I think Hamid's going for a speedy one today, so we'll see how long he goes. But there will be plenty of time for questions at the end. If you've got questions as you go, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on those. And today's seminar is titled What's in a Name? Journal Titles, Their Changes and Impact on Their Perceived Quality by Dr Hamid R. Jamali. Hamid, of course, Associate Professor in the School of Information and Communication Studies, also Associate Head of School for Learning and Teaching, and his research interests broadly cover the area of scholarly communication, including reading, citing, publishing behaviour, journal publishing, open access, and research evaluation. So over to you, Hamid.
Thanks, Simon, and hello, everyone. As Simon said, I'm Hamid Jamali. I'm here at the School of Information and Communication Studies. And given that there is something more interesting going on the campus, which is a question and answer by the BCA, we are trying to keep it short, so if people want to get to that one, they can do that. Basically, I was curious about journal titles for a few reasons, and I did 2 small studies on journal titles, and what I'm presenting here is a bit of results from those 2 studies, but also as a trigger to make you think and reflect more about when you publish. Why did I do that? Because first, there's a good body of literature about article titles, if you're interested. Some of them are amusing and interesting, like the impact of using colon or semicolon, or that are question mark in the article title and its impact on the download and citation, readership and all that. And a lot of evidence in that body of literature to suggest that if you use a country name in your article title, that is associated with poor citation. So if you say in Australia or in Japan, you're more likely to get fewer citations than you don't use a country name in the title. Of course, that is a bit discipline specific depending on the topic of your research. But also the other reason was that I came across a lot of editorial by different journal editors to say that we changed the journal title from this to this because we want to attract more international readers and more international authors, push to internationalization basically.
So Hamid, I think sound might be a little bit quiet for people. Maybe move to the one next to Philip.
Yeah. So first question to make you think is, what factors do you consider when choosing a journal? I'm sure you all have thought about it. Sometimes it happens unconsciously, and it might be a pragmatic decision, but there are things like reputation, impact factor, rank, speed, cost, readership, open access, peer review, etc., etc. And of course, for us, it is RPI as well, because you want to get more points. And that is basically a global thing, which is, metrics, and you want to aim for the most impactful or highly ranked journal as possible as you can. But the question is, does title play any role in your decision? Does it?
I thought it was, I read somewhere that the articles, the ones after the colon makes a difference.
Yeah, this is about...
So maybe the journal also, I don't know if they have colons in it.
Probably not. No. A lot of times you know the journal, so you make a decision. That might not be the case for early career researchers, especially in big fields when there are hundreds of journals. But the point is that the title gives you some information about association that could be with a location like a country, a professional body, a learned society, and so on. But also it tells you about the scope of the journal, like sometimes about radiology, etc., etc. So it gives you information if you don't have a prior knowledge and experience with that journal. And it influences some of the factors you see there, like reputation. If a title is more memorable, it is more likely to help the journal establish a brand and reputation I can give you a few examples of bad titles that they put, like editors and publishers, they put a lot of effort to actually make it, more international and known. But the part of the reason for the failure is that the title is too long and too vague and so on and so forth. So a bit of context I talked about, there is a pressure to publish in highly ranked journals. That's a global phenomenon. There is also a push for internationalization of journals. A lot of journals, especially in developing countries, especially in countries that are not considered Western countries like Japan, Korea, and so on, because they want to get more journals in databases such as the Scopus and Web of Science for various reasons, including to increase their share in the global scientific output and therefore increase the ranking of the country. But also they obviously want to get more, increase the ranking of the journal anyway and help its, reputation and sustainability and so on. And because of those, a lot of time, local journals, national journals, are disadvantaged because people submit to better journals, not better in terms of ranking and so on, and therefore those local journals might not get enough submission, which is called sub-publication drain phenomenon. An example is Korean Journal of Hematology. They changed the title to Blood Research for just this reason. An editor, after 5 years of changing the name, he reflected, or she, I don't remember, in the editorial saying that since the title changed, blood research has progressed rapidly on the international scene in terms of journal metrics. And I've seen quite several editorials like this, that they did it for this reason, and then they think that this is a better move, removing country names from the titles. So the studies I did, I wanted to see to what extent they use geographic names, and if the titles change, and what are the nature of those changes, but also how authors react to those titles with names and associations and so on. And the article title I talked about. So the first study, I looked at the Scopus list of journals. There is a spreadsheet that includes all of the journals in the Scopus with a bit of history of if the title changed and so on. And out of 23,000 active journals that have English as one of their languages or the main language, 14% had a geographic entity in the title, whether that was a country name, city name, or region like Asia Pacific, or a continent like European journal or something. And 12% of them had at least one change in the past. And you can see that the majority of those geographic entities are country name. I also looked at the geographic entities in previous titles of journals that had a title change. And again, you can see out of 705, country was the dominant entity that was named in those. And quite different countries, but some of them, of course, you expect, like American journals, but also China, India, and you can see some developing countries and Asian countries and from different continents, Iran, Japan, Korea, South Africa, and so on and so forth. In terms of subject category, there are 4 broad subject categories in the Scopus, and in terms of changes in those, out of, for instance, 6,500 health sciences journals in the Scopus, 20% of them had a title change in the past. So that was the highest, and then life sciences, and the least or the fewest number of changes was in social sciences. Then I looked how those journals that had a change of title, how they changed, and you can see that those that had a country name, 64% of them removed the country name when they changed the title, probably for this reason, to internationalize. But there were also some percentage that they broadened, like Japanese journal of something became Asian journal of something. Norwegian journal of something became a Scandinavian journal. So they kind of broadened the geographic area. Some of those are natural because some of the associations, they broaden their scope and the membership portfolio, and therefore, and sometimes it might be because simply to attract more readers, attract more papers and so on. And those shows you see the percentage again, you can see here. City name decreased by 43%, country name by 50%, regions by 47%, and those that didn't have any geographic entity increased by 13%, but continent also increased by 45%. I also looked at the length of the title because there were two studies that suggested that high impact journals tend to have shorter titles. And you can see that in famous journals like Nature, Lancet, Science, Liver, Blood, and all a lot of health sciences journals that are very prestigious, they have very short titles. You can see the average, the mean number of characters, 31 characters for all titles, but also did the statistical test, and those that they changed their title and removed country names, they significantly became shorter titles. The second study, I did a survey. I picked a few countries, a mix of developing countries and developed countries in terms of innovation index and some other indexes that are related to science and technology, and also try to include both English-speaking, non-English-speaking, and also countries where national and local journals might be important, like Canada and Germany, and countries where like that concept might be less relevant, like USA. And picked 4 disciplines, a mix of soft sciences like sociology, and hard sciences like physical chemistry, but also a mix of subjects where local and national research might be a thing, like in sociology, local topics are important, but in chemistry, in the opposite end of the spectrum, research is research, so there is no local chemistry, as you say. But also for pragmatic reason, because those are 4 subject categories in Web of Science, so you can get actually the data. And I emailed a few thousands, and I got about 400 responses. What I did, I came up with fictional journals, because I didn't want authors to didn't use the real journals, because they would have answered the question based on their real knowledge and experience. I said, imagine these are journals published by reputable publishers, and they are indexed in citation databases, and they are English. And imagine X is the field, your field basically, because that is the given. You don't publish in journals that are not relevant. Then I asked them, how do you perceive how would you rank these journals? And I presented in a random order to them. And this is the result. So American journal, Brazilian, international, Nigerian, etc., etc. And you can see that, and these are responded from different countries. So American journals, everybody ranked them very high. So 1 is like top rank, is the opposite of what you see here. And for instance, Nigerian was lowly ranked, even by Nigerian themselves. But of course, the range is bigger. And the same goes for Malaysian, Brazilian, but also for, you can see the opposite for Canadian, German, and international. The same, I figured box plot basically here, it is by discipline. You can see a few disciplinary differences, but not a lot. And when I look at the data in terms of how they rank their own countries' journals, like Nigerians rank Nigerian journals and Canadian journals, you can see that for some countries, like there were a bit of more consensus in terms of, like in the case of USA or Germany. So the blue dashed line is the median, and the box plot, that the rest is interquartile and so on. But Brazil, obviously, there were quite a range of the perspectives. Some perhaps they had better knowledge of their journals, but some maybe they were more realistic in their answers and so on. So we see there's some differences here. But in terms of discipline, some differences, not a lot. Did statistical tests, and there was difference in terms of disciplines where local research is more important, like difference was between sociology and chemistry. I asked them a few open-ended questions, like why did you do this? Why did you rank this thing? What was the rationale behind your ranking and so on? And they were talking about a lot of time about their experiences in terms of, in the past, I've read journal from that country, or I've submitted to them, I've done peer review, I know how rigorous they are, and so on and so forth. And some interesting comments. So you can see some of these. They were very honest, and so you will see in the next slide there are a few interesting comments that they say, one interesting point was the impact of predatory journals on how they perceive titles, because they receive a lot of spams nowadays, Journal of Applied and Basic Sciences or International Journal of Recent Research and so on and so forth. So one big impact was on the term international. A lot of them associated that term with predatory or low quality journals. Some, depending on the country, there were some differences, but also they had very strong opinions about certain types of title, like using, and when I looked, some of those instructions have found their way into LibGuides of academic libraries. So they say, if journal titles are like this, they are more likely to be, so they influenced how they think about titles as well. And you see, they say, kind of confessing to the bias that they might have. In some cases, I think I have an implicit bias against journals that are based in the global south as being less rigorous. And there is certainly some systematic bias embedded in my perceptions and rationale of high quality journals, was I try not to publish in journals with any name, any country in titles. So there were quite some, saying that this is not right, but I can't help myself thinking that, this, yeah.
I enjoy the psychologists analysing their own behaviour there.
Yeah. So I don't know, do you want to keep it longer or should
So what, you said that international was associated with
for a good number.
But in that second graph, most people said that international would be ranked a bit higher, maybe 1 or something close to that.
So there wasn't a consensus on the term international, but there were more people who associated that term with poor quality and problematic publishing than with the prestige and so on.
I got told that in a seminar when I was a PhD student, that if a journal has international in the title, then it was more likely to be dodgy. But I've never known why. There's any.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's always the case, but you get a lot of spams these days that
It's a reasonable heuristic, basically.
The other question I was interested in is I wanted to see when they publish in their own country journal in English. And a few questions I asked about that, but also about, the perception of basically seeing the country name titles. 76% agreed that association of a journal with a specific country influences their perception of its readership, but also in quality. 52% agreed that they generally avoid publishing a journal whose title includes the name of a country that they don't consider scientifically advanced. And 58% agreed that they generally expect journals that name a country to publish predominantly papers from that country, but also to focus publishing research that has some local or national significance rather than international. And when I said, when do you submit your paper to your own journal, your own country journal? They said some of them was because when my research findings relate to local and national topics, but also they said when I can't get it into an international journal, or it is good but not good enough for international journal, so I submitted it. So they considered their own English journals a bit lower level than mainstream journals.
Could people select multiple options for that one?
So they could select multiple options, except for I really don't see much. That was like none of the above. And a few other comments, you see that Americans, that was the other finding, that for Americans, this was a lot of also the comments, but also you see the ranking that they said US is the stage of science. So if it is American journal, that is not the same for me if it is like Iranian journal, Japanese journal or something, because they consider that not to be the case for, and to a certain extent for British journals or some Western European, but US was a kind of exception in that case. And you see that US sociology say, I live in the US, so this question of local, national is not for us basically, because a lot of journals are based there, but also they don't consider it that way. A few more comments to read. I'm not sure how quick I was, Simon.
You've been 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's enough. We can stop here, and people, if they want to share experience or have questions or something.
So you mentioned in one of the tables that the titles, when they were changed, they were made shorter. So
Some of them,
over there in that title, because that you had the medium, which was 31, and I think the name changed it to 33 or something.
Yeah.
So 34 or 33.9. So there, does that, so 33.9, was it lower than the previous title mostly?
So I think the difference was between D and E.
Oh, okay, so the old title was 41.7.
Yeah, not between B and C. I think it was, from memory, it was between D and E.
There was quite a bit of shortening from the
Yeah.
41 to 33.
Just a boring methodological question. Presumably some journals have changed title more than once.
Yeah, definitely. So
Does that count each instance of change counts as a D, or did you only look at the most recent change?
no, most recent change, because the date, obviously, if you want to do it properly, you have to use ORIC.
Yeah.
But Scopus, and in ORIC, you can't search the way you wish to. So in the Scopus, there is a column says formerly known as. And that is the last title of that journal. But before that, there might have been, a few other changes. And there might be other journals that, they've changed title but not included. So this is kind of an indication rather than saying that, it was very accurate in terms of percentage and so on.
Sometimes journals don't just change title, they might merge or split.
Yeah, so those are marked differently. They are saying previously part of, or there are different things to that spreadsheet to know.
And which period is it of the change that you?
So the change again, I try to do a historic time like year analysis. There is a field like for date, but when I checked a random sample of those with the ORIC, I realized that is not accurate. So I didn't do that time. But a lot of change, I can say with some confidence that a lot of changes happened in 1990. And partly because a lot of there was some move toward electronic publishing and moving journals to that, but also at that point they considered moving to online and so on. The other thing that triggers that is that when you want to move online, you have to get a new ISSN, and at that point they probably think, and I also found some paper that discussed this thing.
And the emergence of databases.
Databases.
Exercise.
So how likely are older journals to change the name rather than journals which started in the last maybe 25, 30 years?
How likely they are to change?
Yeah, so the older journals, more established, they would probably, I'm assuming, they'll stick to their name.
Yeah, so there are implications for impact factor, for instance. There is research that shows if you change the title of the journal, it takes you a few years before you basically get into the
So
same.
the old impact factor doesn't transfer over when you change the name. It still starts from.
The Web of, you need to obviously let the Web of Science and the Scopus know, and they do things to think, but it impacts, the submission and the calculation and all of that. So they don't. It's not a decision they will take, easily. They are serious about it, but they do it when they think, this is, like as I said, in the case of Korean journals or other journals, when they want to internationalize and they think having said, the title is not a good title, or they need to remove the geographic name. Or sometimes it is natural because associations, the scope gets broader, they change, disciplines merge, new fields emerge, all of that. So some of those changes are natural and okay to happen, but sometimes they are marketing decisions rather than, decisions because of the reflection of the field.
So you're going to investigate that, the reasons for the change?
Reasons, I thought about that, but if I have time, I need to find the sample that they changed more recently and then go and see it.
Do you notice anything in technology journals? Was there particular changes there? I'm just thinking that New Media in Society changed to Social Media in Society when it was a really new name, that sort of thing.
I did like that figure you see for 4 broad disciplines. So I think I have more data in the paper in terms of also changes by discipline, but that's a high level. it says 4 broad categories rather than going into more details of specific subject fields.
Wasim, you had your hand up earlier. Do you have a question, Wasim?
I just wanted to, Hamid, have your view on, you mentioned 2 studies had a significant correlation between the length of the title and their impact. I wonder whether it is a case of having a result which is statistically significant but theoretically insignificant, because I mean, it can be for a lot of reasons actually, but not because of having only the short title, right?
No, I don't think that any of those those studies claim causation. They just probably did a correlation and they said this is definitely not the cause. It is a good decision, and a lot of those journals are well established, like examples I gave, and you can find many more examples in medical sciences specifically, like blood, liver, and gut. I don't know. There are a lot of such journals. Those are probably good decisions they made. Those journals are well established, but it helps in terms of remembering journals and obviously establishing the same thing that goes for movies and books and so on. Picking a good title obviously helps, but it's not going to boost the citation. I think it is a correlation simply, rather than saying that the journal is doing well because it has what I can say is that if you don't have a good title, it's not going to help.
Yeah, it's for the
And
reasons.
I know examples. Yeah.
It's for the reasons you give, right? If you're adding a location, that's extra words. If it's the country journal of this, that's longer than just the journal of this. And also subdisciplines tend to have longer names than these.
So another thing that helps a lot is if it's got a good acronym. So Jalia, JSIST, etc. So that can get around to the long title.
Yeah, they're mostly known by that acronym.
By the way, you have lots of categories, continent, country, etc. Jalia, strictly speaking, would fall into that because it's the name of an institution rather than, strictly speaking, a country.
Yeah, but they still tell people that DC is associated with Australia. So we merged city and university because I know there were cases when it wasn't clear that like Virginia journal of something. So you had to go to the journal and visit the website to see if that Virginia is the Virginia State University or the Virginia as a state. So I merged some of those, but the point for me was that this tells you, I excluded only those that where the name was the topic, like Journal of Japanese Studies.
Yeah.
That Japanese
Yeah,
is
very
like,
slight.
Japan is the topic rather than location of the association. But anything that told you about the association, whether it was an institution or something, then I counted.
So I'm just thinking through the implications of using Scopus as the data for this. So it's by definition, our journals are seeking, often potentially changing their name in order to get access to or be inclusion in a database like Scopus. So it's interesting what the implications of that are. Like that presumably then the other journals that aren't in Scopus are much more likely to have retained their geographic location.
So since I did that research, I came across this paper, Khanna is my say. This is an interesting paper if people want to read. Recalibration of the scope of scholarly publishing, a modest step in a vast decolonization process. So they looked at open journal systems. And they found all the journals that are using open journal system, about 25,000. And they found that, first of all, the majority of those are not in the Scopus of the science. So those are a lot of local journals. There's a lot of diversity in terms of language, but also countries that publish. And they are, to a great extent, they are ignored in entire publishing system because they're not in databases and they are ignored. So they did some analysis on, I think that what you say would be interesting to look at those. A lot of them, of course, they're not English, but a lot of them probably are English as well. So I think there might be more geographic names in this group of journals because these are probably more local and national. journals than what you get in the scopes, for instance, of the science.
That's output.
Yes, yeah, this is the diagram.
So do you consider this pattern as normal or natural? Because you said natural, it's not natural, it's normal. Why?
Normal.
There's a difference between, because we are getting used with that normality, which is not basically healthy or right. Just the example that you mentioned. So my question is, as a researcher in the scholarly communication, your research is a good news or a bad news, and how bad it is?
We need a discovery project to work out, don't we?
So in my conclusion, like I've submitted 2 papers out of this. I said, the point is not to say that journals should do this. The point is to increase awareness about local journals and for editors to think about the implication. But also, as this paper argues, we want diversity. We don't want all journals to go after conformity and all of them become the same and all of them submit to metrics of Scopus and all of that. You want journals to have published in different languages because they serve their community. You want journals to follow their editorial processes to support researchers and different. So that is the conclusion. The aim for me wasn't. The conclusion is not for me to tell editors pick shorter titles or remove the country name. Is that some of these are happening. Some of them sometimes there are normal decisions or there are good logic rationale behind them. But sometimes if it is done only for marketing reasons or only because we want to be in the scopes, that you need to also think about the implication for the real function of the journal, which is if I have a journal to support the scholarship in sociology in Australia, you are probably causing damage to that research. You're impacting on the researcher who rely on your journal just because you want to get a higher impact.
Yeah, and there might be practical, pragmatic reasons for getting a higher impact factor because maybe you're struggling for submissions and your funding is under pressure and to get, so you wouldn't be criticizing editors for doing it, but it does have a potential impact on local scholarship.
And we did a survey of discontinued Australian journals. When we asked them, there were cases, they said, ERA killed the journal because they didn't include, ERA has a list of journals that are eligible for submission. They said, they didn't include our journal in their list. If you're not in ERA list, nobody's going to submit to your journal. That's the end for the journal. So those are the impact of basically some of those decisions and lists and databases. If you're not in certain lists, and we want points, obviously. So I'm not going to send my paper. Nobody's going to send their paper. The editor is going to struggle in terms of getting some quality submissions. And after a while,
yeah. And it's not natural at all. It's very normal.
it's not. No, that's not a good thing,
Yeah.
obviously.
And we have the big problem with this normality, which is becoming, enforcing itself in every aspect of a scholarly communication. And it's an alarming, result that you can see. So, yeah.
I mean, it's worth saying there have been huge benefits to the internationalization, globalization of scholarship, right? That in many fields, it's been a huge boon to go from having local pockets of research to genuine global efforts.
But we are paying a high price other parts, that's the point. So just like the journals that were killed because of this pattern, this is, it's very powerful coming and, that. So diversity is one of the things that is just disappearing and truth, because at the end of the day, the research is supposed to be in service and favor of the truth. But, other marketing and this huge competition that's happening everywhere. So I'm just basically trying to map your result into a bigger picture, and I'm sure you do it in your paper. But my point here is, how do you look at it in a bigger picture, as you mentioned? So
what
it's not, giving journals any advice or any guideline, just raising that awareness that, what is happening because of this normality, which is not natural at all.
So one risk is the damage to local research. As you see this Brazilian environmental sciences, what she or he is saying that is very dangerous, because she's saying, I don't see much merit in directing research investment for local and minor issues.
That's it.
And I used to run workshops in Iran for researchers, and sometimes they said, what's the point of me, like in agriculture, if, the walnut trees are infected by some pest or something, and they would say, that researching that is not going to get me a paper in international journals, in workshops. So they're not going to do research on this problem, which is affecting this community, and is more important because they see, I'm expected to publish, the university wants paper from me. So I'm going to ignore this problem with this orchard here. I'm going to find another problem when I can get it into journal X. And this is what she is saying, and that is the risk, because those policies and decisions impact local scholarship or national scholarship, because everybody wants to get in American journal, and that American editor probably doesn't care about the problem global. That might be the case, and there is indication in the research that they say, international editor think about international readership. If your topic is not going to be that interesting to international readership, we're not that much interested in your topic.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just said there's comments in the chat from Rachel, echoing a lot of this and that, it's part of a metricized neoliberal globalization context, big changes. Q1 journal outputs are intimately tied to promotion, grant applications, so we can't escape it, but it does marginalize certain countries and certain journals with lower impact factors.
And also government regulations, and particularly in developing countries, I observe that that's kind of ruling out all the local journals and local topics areas as well, because I can't speak much of other countries, but for Indonesia, for example, it's really clear for the higher education directorate. They ask researchers to publish in Scopus index.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's indexed anywhere else, it's got to be Scopus. So that kind of limit them. And I know Malaysia is doing it to the probably the same extent as well.
The same, yeah. I'm aware of, for instance, the case of Malaysia, but yes and no's, and we've been involved in Iranian journals. And because of the policy of the Ministry of Science that they want more journals to be indexed in the Scopus, they have had huge impact on what goes into those journals. So they've become useless in terms of research and content to a great extent, just because of that movement.
Yeah. Basically, what we need is a new concept that I call paperless university, which universities that stop measuring papers, of the people, not that paperless, the new concept of paperless. Because since the beginning of these new movements a few decades ago, we are just going further away and away from what is really matters. And so at the end of the day, sooner or later, universities should stop and turn to a new direction rather than just focusing on the number of papers that academics write.
Yeah, Rachel is saying, how do developing countries smash the classing? I think from my perspective, my experience back from home, from Iran, is that they have the wrong policy. They are measuring things that are not helpful. So like the number of papers and how many citations you have. Instead of, and this has been the trend everywhere, that they are moving towards impact, responsible metrics and all of that. But still in a lot of developing countries, they care about their rank and number of papers, and there is always this, you see in reports and news, that China is going to overtake America in terms of number of papers. And for other countries as well. And there have been, I can name Turkey, there are papers about it in Iran, in Malaysia. They have monetary incentive for the number of papers. But that is not going to help the country. What matters is the innovation, what matters is the impact, what problem you solve. So a lot of those policies are wrong because they want prestige in terms of outside face of the science of the country rather than what problems you're solving and what impact they have on society.
And that impact agenda it's driven by these national research evaluation exercises like the UK one, which is called the REF, Research Evaluation Framework, in the last couple of cycles has included an impact assessment. I think it's worth like 20% or 25% of the overall score that departments get, but it's still considered. I mean, it's important, but it's still the judgment of the papers and the links to where it's been published and so on that is driving that, even with the good intentions of that impact agenda.
And you see some of the conversation in, about the ERA, the bit delay. They are saying this, that, that policy, because the last time they wanted more papers, they wanted quantity. Now they are saying, if you follow Twitter and other pieces of news, they're saying that has done its job. We have the quantity now. Maybe we should switch. Maybe we should focus on something else. So hopefully next ERA, whatever they come up with, it won't be about how many papers you have, but something else hopefully.
Rachel's suggesting it'd be good to hear academics' voices in developing countries. So
Yeah.
suggesting follow-up research.
Maybe that's all. And if there are any points, if people want to go to the DVCA.
Yeah, still get to the DVCA Q&A.
If you have questions about bargaining and.
All right, well, look, thank you very much.
Thank
Hamid,
you.
fascinating as always. Yeah, and we'll see you all for the next seminar.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.